there's a ton of technologies over 6%. None of the efficiency really doesn't matter unless you're actually constrained by surface area. The average Canadian home has far more surface area than you need to produce the electrical power you need for the home. Now, if you're thinking of this as a money-making opportunity, which it can be, you will, of course, want to put as many panels up as you can to get as much power out per unit area that you've got, because that's a constraint. You just can't find land. And so efficiency might matter. But what does matter is the cost per unit power. So if you go and talk to the installers, they will give you a quote on dollar per watt. And that's your base, that's what matters. So all this stuff about the types of materials can be erased to some extent by just looking at the cost of them, but it's not the end of the story. And the reason for that is different different materials behave differently depending upon the conditions. So for example, all solar cells will generally produce energy better in cold conditions. So this minus 20 degrees below Celsius, which is killing me, great for the solar cell. I love it. You'll see a bump up in your power, your efficiencies all go up.
Why is that so?
Mostly because of transport. So say in a crystal silicon solar cell, you've created, I know you're a technical person, so I'm going to give you the technical answer. The photon comes in, you create an electron-hole pair, and they're moving out by diffusion. So the less chances, the faster they can diffuse out, the better. The colder the temperature, the less chance they're going to get trapped. Nobody else understood that. The other, so that's for all panels behave better in the cold. Some panels behave better in the heat than others. So amorphous silicon, for example, has this problem called the Stegler-Wronski effect, where the more light that you expose it to, the more defect states there are created in the panel. And you'll get a saturated level of defect states in the panel, and that's what they sell. They guarantee you a certain efficiency, that's what you buy. But if it's hot, you'll essentially anneal out those defect states and get a bump up in efficiency. So when you buy an amorphous silicon panel, two things happen. One, when you install it, you're going to get far more power than you ever expected. It'll be like they made a mistake and accidentally sold you something better. If they didn't, it'll start out and then it will go down and then hit a steady state efficiency. During the hotter months, you'll see that it actually doesn't decrease its efficiency as much as any other panel. The other thing that you have to consider is whether, depending upon the type of panel, all the thin film panels, so the cadmium telluride, SIGs, and amorphous silicon, will perform better if partially shaded or if in, say, cloudy conditions. So they will still produce electricity even on a relatively cruddy day. If you can read a newspaper, they're producing power for you. Where the crystal silicon and crystal technologies like gallium arsenide do not perform nearly as well in what we call diffuse light. They like it to be bright and sunny and perfect days. And because of these differences, the cost per watt of the panels, although they might be the same, will give you a different number of kilowatt hours, and that will affect the economics. And so these are things that you can ask the installer about and ask them to model for you. None of the modeling or anything that I'm going to talk about do you need to do for yourself. All of this should be provided by the people selling you the panels. So installation issues. First, I'm going to go through the types of photovoltaic systems and the aesthetics of them, especially for the resale of homes. That's something that you should consider if you're going to buy your house and retire it and pass it on to your kids. Solar cells are a pretty good idea because they'll still be working for your kids. They'll be working for your grandkids. But if you're going to sell your home, you want to think a little bit about how other people will perceive it. Now, this is changing. It used to be if you put solar cells up in your house, it was actually a negative. And now I think, particularly in Canada, people wouldn't mind having solar cells in their house. They wouldn't mind getting the electricity back. Yes?
Can you just bring them with you? How hard is it to dismantle them?
Yeah, I would. So it's not that hard at all. You'll, of course, have to pay to have them reinstalled. But yeah, I would take them with me. There's some pretty good modeling software that is Canadian-made, Red Screen, which if you're really into this, I highly encourage you to play around with it a little bit. It does all the energy modeling and the economic modeling for you. It's a little bit complicated, but it's not. It's just an Excel spreadsheet with some bells and whistles attached to it. Building codes and inspections and all this kind of stuff, that should be handled by the installer. You shouldn't have to get involved with it. So the types of residential rooftops. Most of the systems that are being installed around here now look something like this, where you had a house that was not constructed and designed for solar, and so the angle of the roof is not optimized for solar. You can get significantly more power out of your solar cells if you have them at the proper angle. You can also get even more energy throughout the year if you change the angle. Now, if your roof is something like this, you might actually consider doing that. It's a little bit of extra labor, but if it makes you a couple $100 extra a year, it might be worth it to you. If it's not worth it to you, you tend to get a fixed angle installation. Now that said, all of these little things matter. Like it matters whether or not your roof is facing directly solar cell. It matters exactly what the angle is. It matters, but it doesn't matter that much. So if you're 15 degrees southwest, you're okay. I've even seen systems put on the west or east side of the house, and yeah, you're not going to get the absolute best performance out of your solar system, but it's still pretty good. And these are all things that can be very easily modeled by something like Registry. And the same with the angle of the roof. If for aesthetic reasons you'd rather stick it directly on the roof itself, do that. You might actually save some money in the balance of systems, which is the racking that you need for it. The ideal case is to have a house that looks something like this, that it was designed specifically for solar, so if any of you are building a home, this is what you should do. It's completely passively solar heated, so all the windows and the overhangs are set up so they don't pay for heat at all. This little part in the front is a solar hot water system, and everything else is PV. And so this house has a jacuzzi and a massive, huge television, has all the bells and whistles you'd have in a normal house, but they don't pay for anything because they pay for it all up front. Now this is another example of a BIPV system where you're designing the solar cells directly into the roof of the home.
Where is that?
I think this one's in California. You can tell by the cars.